A phone call, 6 words, and the world was never the same again. It was July 4th, 2025, while fireworks lit up the American sky celebrating independence, the most dangerous question in modern history was asked. On an encrypted line, 2 men controlling the fate of millions were about to cross a line nobody thought would ever be crossed.
To Putin, I said, if you go in to Ukraine, we're going to bomb in Moscow. I'm telling you, I have no choice to publicize.
That conversation really happened. Sources from the Financial Times confirmed every word. And what you're about to discover in the next few minutes might completely change how you see what's actually going on in the world right now as you watch this video. Because this isn't just another news story about international politics. This is the story of how a simple question can rewrite the history of humanity. To understand the magnitude of this moment, we need to go back one day earlier. On July 3rd, Trump had a call with Vladimir Putin that he himself described as bad and disappointing. Sources close to the American president revealed he came off the call frustrated, realizing Putin was making empty promises about a possible ceasefire. It was the last straw for a president who had promised to solve the Ukrainian conflict early in his term. What happened in those 24 hours between the 2 calls was a complete transformation of the American strategy. Trump, known for his impatience and impulsive decisions, decided it was time to make the Russians feel the pain, as he put it in a conversation with Zelensky. That phrase, seemingly simple, carried the weight of a radical shift in U.S. foreign policy. The July 4th call wasn't just a casual check-in. Sources in the U.S. government confirmed Trump was genuinely interested in whether Ukraine had the operational capability to hit major Russian cities. The question about Moscow and St. Petersburg wasn't rhetorical. It was a real military assessment of escalation possibilities. Zelensky, always pragmatic, didn't hesitate. His response was direct and confident. Absolutely, if you give us the weapons. This exchange lasted only a few seconds, but marked a decisive moment that could completely change the dynamics of the conflict in Eastern Europe. What makes this conversation even more significant is the devastating timing. Just a week before, Russia had launched the largest drone attack in the conflict's history. Over 700 drones in a single night, smashing all previous records. The blood was still fresh, and the frustration from both leaders was palpable. To understand the weight of Trump's question, it's crucial to grasp that Ukraine had already demonstrated this capability spectacularly. In June 2025, a coordinated drone attack destroyed more than 40 Russian military aircraft, including strategic bombers capable of carrying nuclear weapons. That attack wasn't just a military strike, it was a psychological demonstration that Ukraine could hit targets Russia considered untouchable. The message was clear. If they could hit strategic bombers at highly protected military bases, Moscow and St. Petersburg weren't impossible targets. But international politics rarely allow impulsive statements without consequences. Just hours after the call, Trump appeared publicly to make a calculated backtrack. He shouldn't be targeting Moscow, the American president said at press conference. We're not looking to do that. The White House immediately went into damage control mode. Spokespeople explained that the statements had been misinterpreted and that Trump was just asking about military capabilities, not encouraging direct attacks. But anyone familiar with Trump's style saw this public retreat as a calculated political move. Still, the president kept a tougher stance on Russia. He reinforced the 50-day ultimatum he'd given Putin: accept a peace deal or face devastating trade tariffs and increased military pressure. That deadline, ending mid-August, remains a sort of Damocles hanging over the Kremlin. But to fully understand the scope of what was being discussed on that call, it's essential to know the numbers behind the current escalation. Russia wasn't just responding with words, it was responding with a level of firepower never seen before. In the days leading up to the July 4th conversation, Russia launched more than 700 drones in a single night against Ukrainian territory, setting a new record for destruction. This number surpassed all previous attacks recorded since the conflict began. To put that scale in perspective, imagine 700 unmanned aircraft flying simultaneously towards cities, infrastructure, and civilian targets in Ukraine. This escalation wasn't accidental. It was a direct response to Ukraine's successes on Russian soil. Ukraine's growing ability to hit deeper targets in Russia was forcing Moscow to respond with increasing force, creating a cycle of escalation that worried world leaders. Ukraine's response, meanwhile, had become more sophisticated and coordinated. The June attack that destroyed over 40 Russian military aircraft wasn't luck. It was the result of months of planning and military intelligence. Among the destroyed planes were strategic Tu-95 and Tu-1 160 bombers, part of Russia's nuclear arsenal, showing that Ukraine could hit targets Moscow considered untouchable. This Ukrainian capability demonstration fundamentally changed strategic calculations in all involved capitals. If Ukraine managed to breach Russian defenses and destroy nuclear bombers, Moscow and St. Petersburg weren't impossible to reach. Exactly what Trump wanted to know in the July 4th call. While words flew between Washington and Moscow, Kyiv was quietly preparing for a new phase in the conflict. Sources in the Ukrainian government confirmed the country had submitted a detailed list of long-range weapons requests to the U.S., including Tomahawk and ATACMS missiles capable of hitting targets over 200 kilometers away. Ukraine's ability to hit Moscow isn't theoretical or future. It's an operational reality. Since November 2024, Ukrainian drone attacks have regularly targeted the Russian capital region. In March 2025, in a particularly daring operation Russian officials called the biggest attack on Moscow in history, Ukraine launched 337 drones against Russian territory, 91 of which were specifically aimed at the Moscow area. But the real transformation in Ukraine's military capacity is happening on an industrial scale. Ukraine produced at least 1 million drones in 2024 and has ambitious plans to produce 2.5 million in 2025, according to the country's Strategic Communications Center. These numbers aren't just statistics, they represent a fundamental change in the nature of Ukrainian defense. Zelensky has been clear about his strategy: make Russian civilian life as uncomfortable as possible to force Putin to negotiate. This approach, known as bringing the pain home, has been consistently implemented through precise attacks on military and energy infrastructure in Russian territory. The June attack that destroyed over 40 Russian military aircraft was a perfect example of this strategy. It wasn't just a military operation, but a demonstration that Ukraine could hit targets Russia thought were safe and untouchable. Washington's reaction was complex and multifaceted, revealing internal tensions in American foreign policy. On one hand, Trump publicly backed off his most aggressive statements. On the other, sources in the U.S. government revealed Ukraine was about to receive a list of long-range weapon systems that could be supplied through third-party countries. What really changed wasn't just words, but the fundamental structure of American military support. Sources close to the government revealed Trump had approved a $10 billion weapons supply plan in its first phase to be implemented through a partnership with NATO countries. This plan included not just defensive systems, but also offensive weapons capable of hitting targets deep in Russian territory. The U.S.-made Patriot air defense system began arriving in Ukraine in greater numbers. According to official sources, Ukraine is set to receive 17 Patriot systems, a record number that would completely transform Ukrainian air defense capacity. Germany, Finland, Canada, and the UK joined the effort, creating a stronger air protection network for Ukrainian cities. But the real change was happening behind the scenes. Trump had authorized supplying a limited number of long-range ATACMS missiles which, while unable to reach Moscow or St. Petersburg, could hit strategic targets much deeper inside Russia than any previously supplied weapon. Trump's personal frustration with Putin had turned into concrete political change. Sources close to the president revealed he was really pissed at Putin, and that the frustrating July 3rd call was the catalyst for a fundamental shift in the U.S. approach to the conflict. The American plan was carefully crafted. European countries would pay for American weapons that would then be sent to Ukraine. This would let the U.S. keep political distance while providing real military capability. The first phase would include missiles, air defense systems, and artillery ammo, with the option to expand based on Russia's response. The current situation represents a complex military chess game. Ukraine has repeatedly demonstrated its ability to hit targets in Russian territory, but has been careful not to cross red lines that could provoke uncontrollable escalation. Ukrainian drone attacks have been surgical and strategic. Targets include military air bases, oil production facilities, and pipeline control systems. The message is clear. Ukraine can hit anywhere in Russia, but chooses its targets carefully. Ukraine's strategy has been especially effective because it forces Russia to divert significant resources to defend its own territory. Air defense systems that could be used on the front line are now protecting Moscow and St. Petersburg. Moreover, the Trump-Zelensky conversation sent shockwaves through NATO. European countries, already nervous about the conflict's escalation, expressed concern about the possibility of a wider war. France and Germany, in particular, have pushed for a more cautious approach. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte was forced to make public statements reaffirming the alliance's commitment to defense, but also emphasizing the importance of avoiding uncontrolled escalation. This tension between supporting Ukraine and preventing a third world war has been a tightrope walk for Western policy. With Trump's 50-day deadline fast approaching, all parties are speeding up preparations. Ukraine is ramping up its domestic weapons production, with Zelensky announcing plans for half of all arms to be made locally within 6 months. Behind all these geopolitical moves are real people living under constant threat. Residents of Moscow have reported growing anxiety over regular drone attacks, while Ukrainians continue suffering daily bombings that have destroyed much of the country's infrastructure. Humanizing this conflict is crucial to understanding why the July 4th phone call was so significant. It wasn't just two leaders discussing abstract military strategy, but making decisions that will directly affect millions of civilian lives. And as Trump's deadline nears, several possibilities are on the table. A NATO summit is scheduled to decide on sending long-range missiles to Ukraine. That meeting could determine if the conflict escalates to a new phase or returns to negotiations. Ukraine continues speeding up its air defense systems and partnerships with allies for drone production. A potential mega deal with the United States is being negotiated, which could fundamentally transform Ukrainian military capacity. What makes this story particularly fascinating is how it reveals the inner workings of modern diplomacy. In an age of instant communication and social media, decisions once made in secret meetings now happen over phone calls that inevitably leak to the press. The Trump-Zelensky conversation wasn't just about military capabilities, but about political psychology. Trump was testing how far Ukraine was willing to go, while Zelensky was showing his country wouldn't back down from any challenge. As you watch this video, the clock kept ticking toward Trump's August deadline. The question that echoed in that July 4th call, "Can you hit Moscow?" wasn't just about military capability, but about the willingness to completely change the rules of the game. Zelensky's answer may be the moment future generations study as the definitive turning point of this conflict. We don't yet know if this conversation will lead to devastating escalation or forced negotiation, but one thing is certain: the world will never be the same. But what do you think will happen in the next days of this conflict? If you want to stay updated on everything, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any updates. Because the clock keeps ticking, and we're all waiting to see what kind of world we'll wake up to when this deadline finally hits.